Okay, bit of an awkward issue with this and the next bit of raw footage. For some reason, my computer decided to record my full screen when I always set it to record the game window. The next few clips, I'll be cropping a section of the screen, and I'm very much hoping the text doesn't come across as too blurry or anything to that effect in the finished product. Okay, that could have been a lot worse. That's a bullet dodged. And according to the raw footage, I should be done with having to go through the trouble of cropping the clips in a little bit, maybe 2 or 3. The text looks a little blurrier than usual, but still pretty readable as far as I can tell in the editing process. Hopefully it won't be too painful to read the actual dialogue when it comes up for any of the people on YouTube. We'll see how we handle this hiccup. We're just gonna have to wait and see how things look when the video is fully compiled. Okay, so Kira does about as much damage as fire to these zombies. We already knew that healing magic doesn't do as much damage as an equally offensive spell against the undead. Still, it's kind of become a standard thing in stories with magic and undead that healing spells kill the already dead. Was Dungeons & Dragons the first game to start that trend? I've certainly seen it all over the place. Definitely a good thing that Cecile can actually do a good amount of damage with his sword to zombies now. But it doesn't change the fact that the encounter rate is going to really drain the MP our mages have. Hell, this kind of situation is exactly why I generally use physical attacks as much as possible. While magic in most Final Fantasy games can certainly do quite a bit of damage and turn the tide in most battles, if you rely on it too much, then you are completely screwed when you run out. I suppose you could say the same about any kind of supply, really, but unlike something like potions or arrows, you can't just stock up on a good number of them before heading out and start feeling secure because of that. To some degree, it's a choice if you run out of those resources in a dungeon. And while the random encounters can eventually drain even an obscene amount of grit work, it feels like your hands, to some degree, are responsible with how long it takes to run out of potions. But with MP, you don't really have any real options. Sure, you could use ethers, but in a lot of games, that isn't even a viable resource, just something you stumble on. And at least with Palom and Porom, we don't have to worry about healing really screwing with our ability to inflict damage like we did with Tella and Rydia. We can use the girl for dedicated healing, and the boy for the occasional bit of black magic. You know, it really doesn't matter if I'm looking at him when we're traveling or when we're in the battle screen. I am just not a fan of Cecile's new look. It just feels like the game decided to make him change outfits for the sake of it rather than because this is an actual major part of his journey. It's not like he's gonna act any different now that he's a paladin, and I severely doubt that anyone's gonna really react all that differently to him now that he's changed classes outside of that one damn village. It's just that awkward thing where I know what they were trying to go for when we had the trip up Mount Ordeals to transform, and then a battle against his reflection, and it just doesn't feel like there was enough supporting that act in the story, at least in my opinion. And it's not helped by the fact that nobody else gets that kind of character class change over the course of the story. It's a moment that's supposed to come across as epic, and at least in this version, it just doesn't manage to stick the landing. Hopefully, when I get around to the remake of this game, it's going to execute this better, though I suppose the biggest issue the remake is going to have is that in terms of broad strokes writing, everything went from amazing to passable pretty early on. Gameplay is still pretty good, though, regardless of the version, and it's a hell of a lot more engrossing than Final Fantasy 1 and 3, since this has an actual story behind it. those two games literally have about as much, if not less story than the average Pokemon game. I can't really say the same for Final Fantasy II because I haven't gone through it from beginning to end, not even watching it on YouTube. Of course, now I'm wondering when I'll finally get around to working on a Final Fantasy III Let's Play. I just know there's no way I'm gonna do 2 or 13 by any possible means. 15 is a maybe, I have fun with it, but the story is definitely a weak point and incoherent unless you watch some outside material that there is no way I'm doing on this channel. It's kind of a vacation simulator, really, a nice way to relax and wander around a virtual environment, going from one hunt or side mission or main objective after another. I doubt I'd have fun working on commentary for it, but it's fun enough to play through, so I might give it a shot. I'd overall give that game a 7 out of 10. Certainly nowhere near close to the best of the franchise. It's got an incoherent design in many ways, but if you've got the right mindset, it can still be pleasant. 16 looks nice, the story is more coherent, but it kind of feels more generic, even than this game, and this is the game that set the initial standard for Final Fantasy stories. It's essentially a Game of Thrones-inspired title with magical nukes that somehow ends up feeling like less than the sum of its parts. There are other aspects that make it not quite feel Final Fantasy enough to me, despite some familiar names and monsters showing up, but it would most definitely be less of a headache to deal with that story than 15s or 13s. And there are, of course, many non-Final Fantasy role-player games I'd like to do as well, in no particular order. You know, in hindsight, I probably should have fast-forwarded as we worked our way back to town. As long as there's gonna be any conversations in the game before we get there. I guess I figured if I start fast-forwarding, it's gonna be tough to tell myself to stop for the rest of the game. So I suppose we're gonna go at normal speed until we get to the final dungeon of the game. Then we'll start fast-forwarding, because that's going to be an excruciatingly long dungeon. At least if I'm remembering right. Good God, we are getting so worn down just trying to get back down the mountain. Just why does it feel like the constant random encounters are more dangerous to me than the boss fights? Is it the sheer number of them we have to go through when we go from top to bottom? Is the game just not balanced that well, or is there something else going on here? Whatever the case, it's kind of funny to think about, really. I'm just far too used to thinking of bosses as the absolutely big barrier to progress past. That's certainly how they're generally portrayed, but the later bosses in Final Fantasy I and the bosses so far in this game feel like they're less of a challenge to deal with in comparison to the obscene number of foes that come our way. Even the final boss of Final Fantasy I, Chaos, comes across as less dangerous than going from the absolute bottom of that dungeon all the way to the end point. And that's possibly another reason why a lot of role-player games these days have been trying to get away from random encounters. It is just way too easy for that random number generator to make things more difficult for the player than the game designers actually intended. Right. Why did I even think that we could kill the Gatling Hog in one strike with our sword? Of course he's gonna take less damage from a melee attack. He's in the back row! At least it was enough damage so Tella could finish the job. Huh. Tella secured more kills in that fight than I thought he would. Not that I'm crazy enough to track kills in a game like this. That would probably drive me completely insane. Especially when you can end up in another fight less than 2 seconds later. While I could have tried taking on that group of birds, it's probably a bad idea when one of our team is down in the red before we even get a single move. I may not run all that often, but I do like that I have the option, especially if the odds start feeling like downright bullshit. Especially when our biggest issue here isn't the difficulty of any single enemy, but the sheer attrition we take fighting wave after wave after wave. That's your opinion. Even though we can only see some basic sprites, I'm just not a fan of Cecile's new look. Seriously, did we have to get rid of the helmet and put some kind of crown in its place? And why did we get the blue cape? Definitely deserve a bit of rest after all the fighting we had to go through to reach the top of the mountain and then get back. Not that sleeping off the eggs is gonna make up for the fact that our class change removed all of our protective gear and didn't leave anything in its place. It really feels like I should have been buying a lot of healing items in this playthrough. Though I suppose with Tella and the White Mage Girl, we've got a good healing supply for the moment, even without buying a lot of potions. Credit where it's due. I like the fact that people are actually reacting to Cecile's change in appearance, even if I'm not a fan of the change itself. More often than not, it feels like the characters who live in role-player games don't seem to react to the events the player does, staying pretty static for the most part. And the more reactive they are to the events that go on in the game, the more alive the worlds end up feeling to some degree or another. Well, it's certainly been a while since we've had the option to upgrade our gear in a store. Let's see how much this improves Cecile's stats. Oh yeah, definitely very noticeable difference between being essentially naked and having actual armor and a shield. Hell, Cecile had about as much armor as Tella, someone who's supposed to be a squishy mage. No wonder it felt so grueling to get back into town. I suppose if you thought to buy the armor before you went up the mountain, that would make the trip back down less of a pain in the ass. Still, who would think to do that their first time playing this game? It's the kind of trap that's meant to screw with first-time players, and kind of cheap. Ah, well, that's certainly something that won't catch me off guard with the remake. I'm sure there's other ways I'll manage to be surprised with that one, though. Like some of the differences between the original and the remake. It's actually kind of funny how little the PSP version of the game changed from the original experience compared to the 3DS remake and the Pixel remaster. Anyway, that should about do it for our shopping at the moment. Right. So some people here are just not changing their dialogue. Feels a bit more glaring now that so many other people in town have changed their lines. Okay, I'm pretty sure Cecile was already acting like a paladin before he made the class change. Hence why I thought the whole expel the darkness from your heart thing just didn't work too well. He never came across as a dark, edgy person at all. I suppose you could say that's the justification for the class change, that it made the outside fit the inside better and all that, but it really would have worked better if we saw some other Dark Knights in the game who were notably more evil than Cecile. Instead, Cecile is the only Dark Knight we ever meet. Indeed. Now, if only fate would do more to make me care about the individual characters around here. Ugh, come on, Cecile. It's not like these kids were subtle. Sure, they were helpful and we had nothing to hide, but you had to expect at least a little distrust from them, since you were the captain of a major Baron military group last time you were out here. Again, Cecile showed no signs of darkness in his personality other than just plain angst. Of course it does, because we need more evidence that Destiny has a major hold of our main character here. It's not like he's got much going for him other than Destiny, as far as I can tell. How is Cecile born from a dragon? Or is that referring to someone else? Which moon? This planet literally has two of them. Well, that's certainly quite a lot to write on a sword. Depending on whatever alphabet and font they used, that might just go from hilt to tip. Personally, I'd hope that the world-threatening disaster that needs a prophetic savior wouldn't come to pass, making the prophecy itself kind of useless. But hey, if you want to pray things get bad enough that you need some destined hero to rescue everyone, good for you. What's happening is that the time of destiny is apparently upon us, but it's entirely a shame that the person who learned Meteor lacks the magical strength to actually use it in an actual regular battle. Yeah. You're not going to be able to reason with this old man. Just be glad he isn't trying to shatter the planet to pieces to kill that single bastard. Why do I get the feeling it's going to be more troublesome than the Elder thinks? Oh yeah! Because the main villain just introduced that he has some elemental-themed lieutenants, and we've only fought one of them so far. Oh no, we've already lost enough party members recently. At least let us gain a few more before splitting parts of the party up again. I may not be a fan of a magic-focused team, but hey, 4 is definitely better than 2 when you're trying to save the world. This isn't even the first kid who's joined the party, Cecile. Just avoid the same cutscene bullshittery that lost us Rydia, Edward, and Yang, and we should be good with these kids. But then I suppose there's no way to avoid cutscene bullshittery, hence why it feels so damn bullshit. Well, I suppose next time we'll see if the Devil's Road really deserves its edgy title. Yeah, every crystal room looks exactly the same as the others. I wonder who decided on that uniform look and how much of a pain in the ass it is to keep clean. Anyway, may as well save before we move on. Who knows how grueling the next bit is going to be.